Lord, help us to become better versions of ourselves, and in doing so, may we inspire others.
Amen.
During my first semester of college back in 1978, I, along with other freshmen, took a required writing class. In one class session, the instructor presented us with the following question. Now, it's one you may likely have heard, but my 18-year-old self had not. How does it make you feel knowing that you are one person out of 8 billion people, living on one planet out of 8 planets, in one star system out of 300 billion star systems, in one galaxy out of 2 trillion galaxies? As luck would have it, the instructor turned to me to share my thoughts with the class. So my answer was that it made me feel special, a part of something vast and miraculous. Now, apparently that was not the correct or expected answer, because she quickly turned at me and said, "Oh, really? Doesn't it actually make you feel small and insignificant?" Well, it did in that moment. Our perspective shapes our choices, our behavior. It dictates who we are, how we see our role in families, in our communities, in our world. I don't know how you would answer that question. You can tell me later. But based upon our second reading today, it appears to me that I would be in good company, as my answer of significance appears to be in line with the thinking of Apostle Paul. In his letters to Corinth, Paul implores a diverse community to recognize the significance of all its members, to work across differences, to become a more inclusive and loving community. And in doing so, I believe he challenges us to consider how we should not only view our place or role in community, but also the responsibilities and obligations we have to one another. Like last week, Paul's message today about gifts can strike a bit of a celebratory tone. We are one body, many members, but we are not the same. However, we all are significant. We may disagree, but we all should have a voice. Our diversity is our strength. And the messaging is quite appealing, especially on a Sunday of an annual meeting. Today we celebrate the different gifts we bring to St. Simon's. We reaffirm that each of us do matter. We celebrate what ties us together and makes us stronger than we otherwise could be. Now, I understand that Paul is speaking to a fractured church and a fractured community in Corinth, so not all would be happy to hear such a message. If some are being raised up, those already raised will feel threatened. Power and status are difficult to share. But Paul challenges that perspective, I believe, with the following statement. If one member suffers, all suffer. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. And in doing so, he suggests that not only are we all significant, but we are interdependent. We're interconnected. We have a stake in the well-being of others. The success of others relies on us, and our success relies on others. Now, this question of obligation, or what we owe to one another, has always intrigued me. I've shared this before, but I taught high school economics, a field that puts scarcity front and center. It asks how society can best use its limited resources to meet the needs and wants of its people. And from the lens of economics, the idea of obligations and interconnectedness seems logical or obvious to me. The idea that we would live in a stronger, more vibrant community if everyone had enough just makes sense. I used to tell students that if we wanted our taxes to be lower, it's in our self-interest to make sure all people have good jobs so that the tax burden is more equally shared. But I find myself struggling with a different aspect of our interconnectedness today. In a world in which so much of our public discourse centers on the notion of polarization or tribalism or othering, we treat people as if they are not part of our one body, but if they are part of another. And we don't appear to care if the other body is sick or weak, as long as we feel healthy and strong. What we owe one another has moved beyond questions concerning resource allocations and even power to questions of what we owe one another in terms of respect, or dignity, or humanity. Though divisions among people or within the fabric of society certainly are not new to us or the history of the world, we're being told that something appears different this time, and I tend to agree. The growth of social isolation, surrounding ourselves with people that look like us or think like us or behave like us and believe like us, serves to alter our perspective and reduces our sense of community and obligation. It's hard to care for your neighbor if you don't know them or care to know them. And it's certainly hard to understand the issues your neighbor cares about if you are unwilling to learn about their concerns. Paul's argument for obligation, if one member suffers, all suffer, or one member honors, all rejoice, just seems foreign. But even worse, how can we talk to one another when we look at those we disagree with as unworthy of respect or dignity? Last fall, the adult formation team put on a program on the causes of polarization. And if you attended that, you know that I presented a variety of explanations behind the type of polarization we find around us. Maybe it's the teacher in me, but I personally find comfort in exploring such explanations because I can wrap my brain around this kind of analysis. But what I didn't do enough then, but hope to in a follow-up program coming in a couple of weeks, is to more directly discuss how to talk across those divisions. This kind of analysis is more complicated and less comfortable. But if we lose the ability to communicate respectfully and constructively, I fear we are losing the ability to move ourselves forward. And if we continually feed ourselves servings of division and polarization, I worry that that sense of frustration and detachment will grow. And despite the passionate pleas from Pastor Jenny and Reverend Mary to play our parts in restoring humanity, I fear we might choose to remain in our silo and sit this one out and wait for the next opportunity to try to convince others of our righteousness. In preparing for today's homily, I took a look at the next chapter of Paul's letters to the Corinthians. Chapter 13 involves the familiar wedding passages about putting on love. Love is patient, love is kind. But I actually found this chapter speaks to the concerns of a divided culture. Though the chapter is generally used to help frame the notion of what love looks like, perhaps it's revealing to understand what the absence of love looks like. When we don't have love, we are impatient and unkind. It makes us boastful, arrogant, and rude. It insists on its own way. We're irritable or resentful, and we rejoice in wrongdoing, but not in rejoicing in the truth. Unfortunately, this sounds a lot like our public narrative today on all sides. But also in this chapter, Paul adds that when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Perhaps these two passages sum up what is challenging me the most right now. As a culture, we seem to become impatient and unkind, but we're caught in the ways of a child, uncertain or unaware of how to talk to one another. And quite frankly, I've been very disappointed in the voices that I feel should be helping lead us through such troubled times, as they often sound incredibly childish, at least to me. But without maturity, we have fallen into a social reality that's lacking love. Apostle Paul offers love as a cure to what divides us, but he seems to acknowledge that we need to grow up a bit to understand and implement such a cure. So perhaps, like children, we need a role model. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I have often wondered how Jesus might handle such things. What would Jesus do or say if he showed up on a cable news program or had a podcast or a social media account? Now, I'll confess that I actually follow God's social media account. I'm not sure of the source, although sometimes I wonder. But God did command us to love one another, even our enemies. But I guess that's a bit too abstract or simplistic for us to rally behind. Perhaps a more tangible model for us happened earlier this week. Much attention has been directed at the sermon given by Reverend Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy at Tuesday's service of prayer for the nation, where she spoke to our new president, our new vice president, and members of the new administration, as well as a host of others, about the idea of unity. But what struck me the most is not what she said or who she said it to. It was the way she said it. In addressing what she called a growing culture of contempt, she spoke powerful words to powerful people, but she spoke them with grace. She spoke to the importance of all people and all people's gifts, about the importance of speaking truth to one another, but she did so in love. Just like Paul speaking to the people of Corinth, Bishop Buddy was speaking to a troubled community, offering love as a cure. But what was most noteworthy, at least to me, is that she showed that speaking through love doesn't mean you avoid saying difficult things. It doesn't mean that you're complicit, doesn't mean that you don't call out injustices, it doesn't mean that you enable or normalize, and it doesn't mean you don't confront misinformation or disinformation. She showed we can do both, speak our truth and show love. Perhaps this is similar to a difficult conversation you might have with a loved one, suffering from an illness or engaging in unhealthy behavior, gently encouraging a different path. Now, almost on cue, there were immediate reactions to her sermon. Bishop Buddy faced questions about the timing and the location of what she said, and in my opinion, some criticisms have been quite juvenile. But I wonder if because she chose to express herself in the way she did, eventually her message will better ripple out. Perhaps a gift wrapped in love will be better received. And maybe that's what we owe one another. I don't know, but it's something that I've thought about of late. If we don't find a way to communicate and find a path forward, I fear that we will continue to reside in a world that nourishes us in a culture of contempt, and that we will continue to be disconnected to our own peril. Our societal wounds will be left untreated, they'll fester over time, the body will weaken, and our individual and communal lives will not be what they could have been. And I'm not so sure how God, who talked about loving one another as a commandment, not an option, will respond to that. You are one person out of 8 billion people, living on one planet out of 8 planets, in one star system out of 300 billion star systems, in one galaxy out of 2 trillion galaxies. But you are significant, and the world needs your gifts. Perhaps at this particular time, wrapping those gifts in love will make them better received by both the world and by our God.